Hey, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Topics today include poop, purity, and preservation.
Wrong! What's wrong with you? What's wrong with y'all?
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you people? Wrong! You do have to tolerate it. It's my show.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm here to talk about politics, culture, religion, sports, and anything else you're not allowed to talk about in polite company. Issue number 1! Wait for it! If you're a pediatrician, you have a very common problem. And that is parents of young children, usually 3 or 4-year-olds, coming to you saying, "My child swallowed something. Are they going to die?" Particularly in regards to Lego pieces. And not just any Lego pieces, the little head of Lego men. You know how this happens. The kid puts it in their mouth, they're playing around, they're playing with it with their tongue or whatever in between their teeth, and oops, they jump and it falls down their throat. Or it's stuck and they don't know how to get it out and they put it in their teeth and they pull and then it, shoots into the back of their throat and they swallow it. And a group of doctors was like, this is really no problem at all. Let's prove to everybody that it's no problem. So the 6 doctors, they all got together and they simultaneously swallowed Lego heads for science. And then they waited. And eventually, they started processing the Lego heads out of their system. And they would check their poop daily to see how long it took to find the Lego head. And for each Lego head, they gave it a certain score. They called it the found and retrieval time. Yes, the acronym is FART. And they recorded their experiences and submitted a paper to a very prestigious medical journal for pediatricians. And the journal said, hey, this is super useful and good information because, yes, everybody wants to know, are their kids okay if they swallow Lego heads? But we cannot accept your article. And the reason they couldn't accept the article was because they do not allow people to experiment on otherwise healthy patients, even if it's themselves. And so these doctors, they had a problem. How do we let the people know? Eventually, they found some other publication that would take their paper and publish it for them. You might be asking yourself, probably not, but you might be asking, how exactly did they find these Lego heads? Well, here's what one doctor said was the best way to find the Lego head.
Another one of the pediatricians came up with what was later determined to be the best strategy, which is you put your poop inside a plastic bag, like a Ziploc bag, you seal it, and then you just mash it up. So you are sort of insulated from the smell. You are not actually touching it. And it's pretty easy just to sort of smush your hand against it and just see if anything hard is there.
So, if you happen to be the parent of a small child, keep some Ziploc bags around. You never know when you're gonna need to smush something up. Issue number 2! Changes! You may not know this, but in 1988, George Lucas went to Congress. And he went to Congress with Steven Spielberg to complain about something that was happening to movies. Ted Turner had just bought all these movies and he was colorizing them. And this just infuriated Lucas. He's like, you can't change these movies. You can't change them in this way. That's not right. And he went so far to say in his testimony to Congress, he said, our cultural history must not be allowed to be rewritten. Now, what's interesting about this is George Lucas famously reworked his Star Wars movies. He changed them. In fact, after he changed them again to some degree. If you're a Star Wars fan, you know that Han Solo shot first, right? Well, then Lucas changed it so that Han Solo shot second. And then, after everybody complained, he made it so that Han Solo shot Greedo simultaneously. It's all messed up, and it seems so hypocritical for George Lucas to make this claim that movies shouldn't be rewritten. Part of his testimony led Congress and the Library of Congress to create the American Film Registry. And the whole point was to take these original movies and to preserve them in the Library of Congress in their original format so that the original thing could never disappear. We would always have it as a cultural artifact. And whatever other people might do in the future, we would have the original. One of the very first movies to be included in the National Film Registry was Star Wars. And George Lucas, to this day, has not sent an original version of Star Wars to the Library of Congress so that it can be preserved for us in perpetuity. It's just kind of wacky. I bring all of this up because there was big news this last week that the owners of Roald Dahl's books have decided to make some edits to bring them kind of more in line with today's culture. They were written about 50 years ago and set even further back, and the current copyright owners of these books thought, you know what, this is kind of outdated. We need to change some things. Here's one of the changes. So in the original version of The Witches, there was a sentence that said, referring to women, even if she is working as a cashier in a supermarket or typing letters for a businessman. They changed that to, even if she is working as a top scientist or running a business. That's the new version. And then in Matilda, they changed, she went on an olden day sailing ships with Joseph Conrad. She went to Africa with Ernest Hemingway and to India with Rudyard Kipling. They changed that to, she went to 19th century estates with Jane Austen. She went to Africa with Ernest Hemingway and California with John Steinbeck. Now, there's going to be a huge number of people who have no idea why it's not okay for Matilda to travel with Joseph Conrad or Rudyard Kipling. No idea, particularly children. They have no idea. What have these two men done wrong that children cannot learn their names anymore? And how are we so certain that Jane Austen and John Steinbeck won't be, declared inappropriate at some point in the future? Let me just tell you, I am all over the place on this topic. I mean it. I am really, really all over the place on this thing. On the one hand, it is fine for George Lucas to change his movies because he owns his movies. And if he wants to change them, he's the owner. He's got the ability. Go for it. On the other, come on, man. We all know what the original was. We all like the original. Why do you feel like you need to change it? And with these books, yeah, assuming that the highest paid job a woman can have is a cashier at a supermarket, that's not cool. We know that's not to be the case. And, these people, they own the book now. They're the author's estate. They're allowed to change it. It's their thing. They can do it if they want to. On the other hand, yeah, it's outdated. We talk that through when we read it with our kids or when we read it ourselves. We're like, hey, how come things are different now? It's an opportunity for us to talk about how things have changed and how there's more opportunities for women and why we don't want to be colonialists like Joseph Conrad. I'm a little bit frustrated that they feel like they need to take it out. And then, on the other hand, if Kentucky Fried Chicken decided that the American public didn't want their chicken to be so salty anymore, and that they were going to reduce the amount of salt, I have no idea why this would ever happen, by the way. If anything, they're going to add more salt in the future. But if Kentucky Fried Chicken decided to do that, it would be because they'd want to make sure that their chicken still sold, right? They have chicken to sell. They want to give people the chicken they want. And perhaps editing these books, they're like these, the copyright owners on these books are like, hey, if we leave these books the way they are, everybody's going to stop reading them. People are going to be like, nope, we're not cool with whatever was going on at the time these were written. We're moving on to some other children's fiction. And I bring up Kentucky Fried Chicken because of its delicious goodness, but also to point out, and this came up in a conversation I had with my friend Jeremy about a year ago about movies and about editing them with something called VidAngel, where there is this line between art and commodity, and we aren't exactly sure where it is. And when the publishers of Matilda decide to make changes so that it's more profitable, they're saying, hey, this isn't art. This is a commodity. This is something we sell to people. And I don't know where to draw the line, and I don't know where you should think about drawing the line. But I'll tell you one thing. I'm not all that concerned about changes to Matilda, but if they took the N word out of Huckleberry Finn, I would be really, really disturbed by it. As offensive as that word is, and exactly because that word is offensive, I think it belongs in the book as it was written. In Huckleberry Finn, not Matilda, just to clarify. If it's in Matilda, please take it out. I don't care, take it out. But Huckleberry Finn, not a children's book, which is also confusing for so many of us. But yes, leave that word in Huck Finn. Give Mark Twain his due, and I really don't care what you do with Roald Dahl. About a year ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, there were a number of Dr. Seuss books that were going to be discontinued. And I did not touch it at the time. But man, the culture war was really upset about Dr. Seuss getting canceled. And the fact is that the books that they discontinued weren't selling well. True, they had some illustrations that were inappropriate for today's tastes. But in general, the books just weren't well known and they weren't selling. They were books I hadn't even heard of. Other people, they're Dr. Seuss experts and they're like, oh yes, I have 3 copies of this book myself. I'd never heard of them. And the reason for discontinuing them was because they couldn't sell. Now, maybe if they had edited them a little bit and they had taken out these offensive illustrations, maybe they would continue to sell. I don't know. Where would we be more upset? That they changed the Dr. Seuss book slightly or that they just stopped selling it entirely? I don't know. So after all this backlash about these Roald Dahl books, the publishers have said, hey, we're going to offer both versions. We're going to offer this new version and the old original version. And we'll let the public decide which version they want to buy. Which has led many to accuse them of kind of doing a new Coke thing. Like, oh, we're going to take away the old thing. Just kidding. You can have the old thing and the new thing you choose. And that makes the old thing even more popular, right? Like, none of us were talking about Roald Dahl books all that much. And all of a sudden, now it's the biggest thing in literature to talk about. Maybe we really should pick up Matilda again. I don't know. I think they just made a mistake. And they're suffering the backlash from the public about it, and I hope they kind of just go with the original. But that's just me. Now, I'm going to introduce a new segment called...
Oh, what are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules?
Recently, I was talking to this guy, and we were just having a one-on-one conversation, and this has happened to me before. But this guy just reminded me of this thing that's super annoying. I can't stand it. We're having a one-on-one conversation, and he starts slowly moving to my side. And all of a sudden, I feel like I'm having to talk to him like over my shoulder. Like we were face to face, but now I'm like looking backwards to look at him. And this has happened to me in the past where like the person like eventually they get behind you. Has this happened to you? And so I tried to turn my body to make sure that I'm still face to face with him, and he keeps inching, around me. And I'm like, what is going on? What is this thing where occasionally people feel like they need to be next to or behind you as they talk to you? Like, am I this intimidating that you can't be face to face with me? You can't make eye contact with me? It's a new rule. When you're talking to somebody, stay face to face with them. Don't move behind them. Remember, I want to know what's wrong with you.
What's wrong with you?
If you'd like to submit a question, topic, or tell me how I was wrong, you can email me at listen@thewrongpodcast.com, or submit a comment at my website, thewrongpodcast.com, or text me on my personal phone like my annoying friends, and help me spread the wrong message. If you like what you hear, share it with your friends. Now it's time for my favorite part of the show, I Was Wrong.
I was wrong. I was wrong.
The lovely Wendy submits a comment directly to me, not on the website, not over text messaging, directly to me. Here's the lovely Wendy.
Hey, Tim. So you talked about divorce being contagious, and I think the implication there was be careful about hanging out with people who have recently been divorced or are in the process of divorce. And that just didn't sit right with me, because it seems like when my friend is going through a divorce, that's the time that she needs me more. And so I'm just trying to reconcile that in my head, but just wanted to give that piece of feedback that I don't know how to fix the contagion of divorce, but I want to be there for those who are going through it.
I am so glad you asked this question and asked me to clarify. I hope I did not imply in any way that no one should hang out with divorced people, particularly when they're in the midst of their divorce. For any reason, much less in an effort to save your own marriage. No. If somebody's going through a divorce, you hang out with them. You do what you can to help them move to a place of health, and whatever the reason for the divorce. And you might have reasons to discontinue that relationship, but it shouldn't be just because they're getting a divorce. And what comes to mind was a number of years ago, there was a man who came into the United States. I believe he was in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and he had Ebola. He was dying of Ebola. And there were a couple of nurses who decided they were going to care for him until he passed away. They were going to do the best to get him healthy or to help usher him into death in a clean, safe, pain-free way as best they could. And they took all of the precautions they could to make sure that they did not get Ebola, despite the fact that they would have to expose themselves to him. And that is the right mindset. Yes, of course, you help your friends, and you take whatever precautions you need to make sure that your marriage stays secure. Issue number 3, spirals. I want to tell you about a black professor. He was the director of a university's Black Studies program, and he leads a number of anti-racism and transformative justice workshops. He's published books on anti-black racism, and he is in favor of prison abolition. He wants to do away with the prison system entirely because it hurts the African American population. He lives in a predominantly black neighborhood in Philadelphia, and his daughter goes to an Afro-Centro school. And he's on the board of a local black cultural organization. The other thing you need to know about this man is that he was removed from a summer seminar on black studies because he failed to live up to the standards of anti-racism according to his students. Now, just before he was removed, let me back up and tell you, this is an unusual situation. It's a summer seminar where high school students are invited to live together, and they earn college credit, and they live together for, a month or two during the summer, and they bring in college professors to teach them about, something specific, and this goes on their future college transcripts. It's true college credit. And This system is meant to be extremely democratic, I guess is the best way to put it, where the students make up their own rules and they figure out kind of what's best for them. There's adults helping them, but the students are in charge. Well, in this particular instance, the professor, he was only there to teach. He's not there to help with the residential aspect or the democratic process. He's just supposed to show up for a couple hours every day to teach the subjects and to review their papers and to answer questions from the students. I guess the best way to describe this other adult would be like a residential assistant. She was a woman who also had an advanced degree in Black Studies, and she had some very particular views on how this thing should go and what the students should believe and what the professor should be teaching. And she had more cultural influence over the students than he did. And there were a couple of students, they happened to be Asian students, but they didn't come into the program with the same fervor and dedication to the subject matter as the resident assistant or many of the students. They were there to learn, and they didn't know many of the orthodoxies that many of the students had already adapted and adopted. Adapted and adopted? They had adopted and embraced. And they had asked some questions that kind of questioned, hey, is this the way things really are? There was a particular viewpoint that was just accepted as gospel. It was truth. It was orthodox. And they were trying to learn it. And the way the classes were set up, it was in a dialogue. The professor, he didn't just lecture at them. He introduced questions and had feedback and conversation about it. And two of the students, they had asked questions where they were trying to learn, and their questions were unacceptable. And being the democratic process as it was, the resident assistant, she indicated that maybe the rest of the students should vote these two Asian students out. And sure enough, they did. They were voted out. And then a week later, all of the students, most of them white, came to the professor to let him know that he should leave the program as well. And this is what he said about it. He said, each student read from a prepared statement about how the seminar perpetuated anti-Black violence in its content and its form, how the Black students had been harmed, and how I was guilty of countless microaggressions, including through my body language, and how students didn't feel safe because I didn't immediately correct views that failed to treat anti-Blackness as the cause of all the world's ills. He went on later in this article to say part of the problem was that he did not defer to the opinion of a Black woman who was the resident director. And because he did not do things as she said he should do them, this was one of his many faults and a reason to remove him from the program. There's this other story about knitting on Instagram. And this man, he makes knitting patterns, and he interacts with, other people who are really into knitting on Instagram. And one day he was taken aback because a Black woman had commented, and he realized that she was the first Black woman he had ever remembered seeing in any of these conversations. And he realized, wow, I'm in a very, very white space. Like, there's not a lot of diversity among the people I'm talking with. So he created this hashtag about diversity in knitting, and he said, hey, if you're Black or Hispanic or Asian, and you're following me, give me a follow, let me know you're out there, and I'll follow you back because I want to hear more from you. I want to expand my worldview. And other people adopted this same hashtag that he created. It went from a conversation about knitting into a conversation about critical race theory. And it wasn't just about critical race theory. Its tone got really, really vicious. And And people really went after other people who were like, hey, why are we talking about this? And shouldn't we be talking about knitting? And, they were being accused of white supremacy. And eventually this man who created the hashtag, he said, hey, this is not what I had in mind when I put this hashtag out. I wasn't looking for this kind of conversation. And immediately people turned on him. They're like, hey, this guy is not allowed in this space anymore. He is not safe. And eventually this guy became suicidal. He had to seek treatment. It was like, it went really off the rails. And eventually he wrote this blog post, explaining himself and why he created the hashtag and why, things had gone the way they had and how disappointed he was. And eventually he had lost a ton of business from his cancellation, I guess, for lack of a better term. He lost a lot of business. And he wrote this blog post explaining who he was and what he believed and why he started the hashtag in the first place. And he was able to regain all of that business. But, knitting, really? Like, crazy, right? And this is something called a purity spiral. It's where you want to do the right thing. But your pursuit of that right thing leads you to make sure that anybody and everybody around you is even more pure than you are. And it's not just the pursuit of whatever the goal is. The pursuit becomes to create a ghetto. And it turns a morality into a use of power against other people. And it's okay if the group gets smaller and smaller as long as I become more powerful in the group, right? That's the idea of some of the people within a purity spiral. And eventually, sometimes the people who are leading the charge, they end up on the outside too. The spiral just gets smaller, it pushes them out as well. And this is not a left-wing thing by any means only. It happens on the left and the right. A good example is with Drag Queen Story Hour. It's the thing where a drag queen goes to a library to read a children's book to children. And there's lots of reasons to be concerned about this. But other people are like, hey, it's just a fun thing to do with my kids. And, men in drag, they're clowns, and that's okay. And it's a different form of clowning. And I'm not going to get into whether or not it's appropriate to turn the image of a woman into a clown, although I just did. But anyways, there's people concerned about this. And David French, he's this conservative columnist. He said, hey, there's lots of reasons to be worried about Drag Queen Story Hour. I would not take my child to one of these things. But also, it would be a violation of the First Amendment to try to block them, to try to make sure that they never happen, to write laws that say that they can't happen. The First Amendment is in place, and it protects all of us. And one of the side effects of the First Amendment is that things like Drag Queen Story Hour are allowed to take place in our society. And a lot of conservatives were like, nope, this is not okay. How dare you defend Drag Queen Story Hours? And he wasn't defending Drag Queen Story Hours. He was defending the First Amendment and just talking about the practicalities of our law in trying to stop Drag Queen Story Hour. But people are like, nope, that's it. He's out. He's a liberal. Well, the story doesn't stop there with David French, because recently he became a columnist at the New York Times. And if you already didn't like David French before, now that he is, on the payroll of the New York Times, all the more reason to hate him. He was hired by the New York Times because they want to include more conservative voices. And recently, a number of staff members at the New York Times were troubled by the coverage of trans issues in their newspaper. And what troubled them was that some of the journalists were writing articles about science and health, and about how hormone treatment for prepubescent children may not be healthy. We don't have all of the data yet to say whether it's healthy or unhealthy. And these journalists, they were discovering information and bringing it to the public, from scientific minds. They wrote these news articles saying that we don't know yet what the long-term impacts of hormone treatments are. And some of the staff are like, hey, this can't go on anymore. We cannot have articles written by this. This creates a hostile work environment for some of the trans writers on staff here. And the newspaper is violating employment law to allow other people to write these sorts of stories. And it doesn't help that we have conservative columnists on staff as well, such as Ross Douthat and David French. Again, nobody's saying that, hormone treatment should happen or shouldn't happen. None of these journalists are defaming trans people as immoral or as pedophiles, or anything like that. They're just reporting the science that is unknown. And the purity spiral has hit the New York Times, which is no surprise at all because it kind of hits the New York Times all the time in their stuff. And to the editors and publishers' credit at the New York Times, they said, we're going to continue reporting the news. So kudos to the New York Times, at least in regards to this issue. The bottom line I want to get to on this is that morality is not the same as purity. And it actually leads in quite well with Wendy's comment to me about divorce. I would say avoiding divorce is a moral thing to do. It is morally good to keep your marriage intact wherever possible. That morality is different than purity. And a pursuit of purity would be, hey, I'm so dedicated to making sure that I protect the morality of marriage that I'm going to expel and expunge from my life anybody who's experienced divorce. I'm going to push them out. I need to be clean. And your marriage can remain moral despite the impurity of your relationships. And this goes for many, many other things. Pursue your morality, absolutely. But don't let purity become a reason to exclude people from your life. But I could be wrong. If you think I am, let me know. Let me know why. I had fun and I hope you did too. Bye-bye.